Bob, we know that with 401k plans, there's a mathematical non-discrimination test known as the actual deferral percentage, or ADP test. Is there a similar test for 403b plans?
Well, 403Bs, I think, at least for the mathematically challenged, are somewhat easier because in 403B, rather than having a mathematical test, we have a test for elective non-discrimination. Remember, I talked about your contributions in 403B could be either elective contributions, that is your salary reduction contributions, or non-elective contributions, such as your employer match or discretionary or mandatory contribution on your behalf. But let's focus for a moment on elective contributions. Here, there is no mathematical test as there is in 401k, but rather there is a standard called universal availability. Bernice, what this means is, for example, let's assume we were school teachers working for a public school. If I had the right to make elective deferrals, you, unless you were among one of the permissively excludable groups that I'll talk about a little bit later, also would have to have the right to make that. Universal, that means it applies to everyone. Universal availability. That is the standard for elective non-discrimination in 403B. Now, this universal availability has many, many factors, and interestingly enough, it applies to each common law entity separately. It doesn't group what we call control groups together. It applies to them separately, and the regulations talk about those instances where this application takes place. But let's look at universal availability. Remember, I was saying if I have the right to do it, unless you fall into a permissively excludable group, you also would have to have the right to make these elective deferrals. But what happens? What happens sometimes is our agents, during the conduct of an exam, go into the Human Resources Office or Personnel Department, and they say, does everyone have the right who could not otherwise be properly permissively excluded? Does everyone have the right to make elective deferrals? Why, yes, the personnel person tells them, and an agent then says, well, if they have that right, how do folks know about it? Bob has the right to do it. How does Bernice know if she has that right? And the answer is, unfortunately, that they give the agent. If Bernice came in and asked us, we would tell her she has that right. Well, that doesn't quite work, because part of universal availability is that participants who have the right to make elective deferrals are given a meaningful notice of that right, something affirmative on behalf of the employer that communicates this information to the participant. We don't say what type of communication this could be, whether electronic, hard copy, but there must be some form of a meaningful notice. Also, to satisfy universal availability, we deal with the election timing. Well, individuals have to know and be given the right as to when to enter into a salary reduction agreement and how many times during the year or when during that year they can alter that agreement to accommodate, for example, differences in desired reduction of their salary. So such items as meaningful notice, election timing, that is discussed in the regulation as being part and parcel of the universal availability requirement.
Is there anything else needed to satisfy universal availability?
Yes, one of the other items besides election timing and meaningful notice is that the right to make salary reduction contributions to your 403B may not, much like a 401k, be conditioned on something else. Now, basically, to take a simple example, you can't tell someone that unless they take a certain level of health insurance, they can't make salary reductions to their 403B. That would be conditioning the right of salary reduction elective deferrals on something else. It doesn't work in 401k, and it's not going to work in 403B.
Can anyone be excluded from making elective deferrals to 403B plans?
Well, as I said earlier, everyone must be given the right to make salary reduction elective deferrals unless they are among various permissively excluded groups. And I emphasize the word permissive because you don't really have to exclude anyone. As long as individuals are your common law employees, they can be given the right to make salary reduction contributions. Now, when I say common law employees, it's important to note that if, for example, you were dealing with a public school that outsourced their janitorial, cafeteria, transportation services to an organization, or an organization that leased them employees for that purpose, those employees would not be the school's common law employees and couldn't even be in a 403B that the school offers to begin with. So it has nothing to do with excluding them, because 403B only applies to an organization's common law employees. But assuming that a group of individuals are common law employees, who can be permissively excluded so that the organization does not run afoul of the universal availability non-discrimination for elective deferral requirements? Well, one of those groups are employees eligible under other deferral plans. For example, where a 401k exists that pertains to salary reduction, where a 457B governmental eligible plan exists that also provides for salary deferrals. Those employees can be excluded. Non-resident aliens can be excluded. Students could be excluded. And finally, the group that perhaps is the most major of the permissive exclusions are those individuals who ordinarily work less than 20 hours per week. Those individuals could also be excluded if they ordinarily work less than 20 hours per week. But what are the problems we find with these 20-hour-per-week people? Because remember, that is the most popular of all the permissive exclusions. Well, I'll give you an example that we encountered on a live examination. What happened was it was pursuant to what I'd like to call the problem of poor written plan design. This organization did have a written plan, and in it they said only full-time employees can make salary reduction agreements to the 403B. Full-time was then defined in the plan as those employees who work 2,000 hours. And what happened, our agents went in, found people who were working 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 hours a year, obviously ordinarily more than 20 hours per week, and that program failed universal availability. So that could happen pursuant to poor plan design. But there are instances where excluding people who work a lot is not really a problem. Let's take, for example, a university or a tax-exempt organization that sponsors a summer camp. They go ahead and they have counselors working at this camp who might work 50 hours a week for up to 2 months. Well, they feel if they haven't covered those folks, they have a problem. They failed universal availability. No, because we really look at it on a yearly basis. So working the 20 hours or more for 2 months would not cause people to have to be included in regard to the 403B elective deferral opportunities. Tax-exempt organizations, for example, hire people who do what they call stuffing envelopes prior to the Christmas and Easter season for solicitations. And what happens is these people, again, may work 40 or even 50 hours a week, but maybe just for a few-week period. They have not done their ordinarily work 20 hours per week on a yearly basis. But the question always was, Denise, prior to the regulations, where is it written that this 20-hour per week is done and viewed on a yearly basis?